This is Torah and Technology, Ancient Wisdom for Digital Age. This is Rabbi, and with Rabbi Daniel Nevins. This class is a continuation of a session given in fall 2024. In this course, we will consider revolutionary new technologies and put them in conversation with halakhic concepts, texts, and norms. Topics including lab meat and kashrut, autonomous machines and moral agency, artificial intelligence, and the redefinition of personhood. Each session we will examine primary texts from Talmud, medieval codes to Modern Responsa, considering what norms are most compelling and useful in addressing the moral and religious challenges posed by these new technologies. This is I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Rabbi Nevins, this class is a bit of a preview of your upcoming book, which will hopefully be published this year. And if you're joining us on Zoom, thank you. We're glad to have you here. Please feel welcome to turn on your camera. We want to see you. It makes for a nice Beit Midrash atmosphere if you can. And if we can see you, if we can't, if you're on Zoom, if you're on Facebook, if you're a panelist or an attendee, please feel welcome to ask questions. We do want to hear what you want to say. Don't hesitate to either ask in chat, or if you're a panelist, unmute yourself and sing out. Like this class, if we don't ask questions are there for the asking. With that, I do want to hand the mic over to, so to speak, to Rabbi Nevins, even with as small of a class as it is, which seems to unfortunately be the trend. But you know what? I'm looking forward to learning something. I hope everyone who's on here is looking forward to learning something. I hope the people out there on Facebook who are tuning in, do sing out, and I hope you learned something. And with that, the floor is yours. Bivracha.
Thank you, Kayla, Erev Tov, Shoshana, and anyone else who's out there on the live stream. Yes, thank you for that introduction. Indeed, I do have a new book that's coming out. Actually, very excited. I just got with the fading, anyway, I just got my first proof copy in the mail. And so once we finish the final sort of formatting, editing stuff that happens, we'll release it to the world in March. So I'm looking forward to that. So Kayla, in your introduction, you said this is a continuation from the fall of 2024, which is interesting because I haven't gotten to time travel yet. That's not my
pardon me, I transposed something 2023. I wish.
I know we put a close on 23, but yeah, we did start the series in the fall, but unfortunately we launched it the first week of the war between Israel and Hamas, and didn't really feel like it was the right time for that conversation. But tonight we are continuing. This is the third session, and even though I don't see many people here, we are recording it, and so I'll teach it the way I would teach in front of a larger group. So the book that I wrote is called Torah and Technology, Circuit Cells and the Sacred Path. It's looking at halakhic perspectives on sort of cutting edge technologies of our time: artificial intelligence and autonomous machines, genetic engineering, lab-grown meat, which we studied last week, and many other things: triage, ethics, and use of technology for prayer, and many other things. So tonight we'll look at the AI and autonomous machines. AI itself, of course, is everywhere, but it's when AI gets paired with machines that are able to function in the world that some of the most dramatic halakhic challenges occur. After all, halakha does have something to do with the inner world of our minds. As Rambam begins in Mishnah Torah with Hilchot Deot, Judaism does care about what we think, especially emotions like yira, or reverence, and ahava, and love or commitment, enthusiasm. And certainly also the Torah tries to create a setting where we don't have negative emotions, like lo tachmod, the 10th of the 10 commandments, don't envy, because perhaps that's the hardest of them all. You can perhaps do the other actions, go through the motions, but to actually purge yourself of envy is one of the hardest things. And so when we talk about halakha, we're normally speaking about actions in the world. And so with AI too, we're interested not only in is a computer capable of analyzing a fluid situation, but is it also capable of acting in the world? Now, I'm using the word autonomous, and I'm using it carefully in differentiation from two other words you'll use fairly often, automatic and automated. And you could say that there isn't such a difference between them, but I'm going to give you a definitional approach that differentiates between each of those. Automatic is a machine that can function within certain parameters automatically, and there's really nothing complicated about it. So, for instance, the thermostat, a regular thermostat in a house is programmed that when it's set to 72, if the house gets colder than 72, it turns on the heat. It completes a circuit to turn on the heat. Or if it's in air conditioning mode, if it gets above 72, it'll be set to turn on the air conditioning. There's nothing complicated about that. It's just a threshold that gets met. And once it's met, then the action ensues. It's automatic. Automated refers to a more complicated type of device that perhaps is aware of more than one variable. So, for example, it might say that, well, we've got a complicated schedule, that during the weekdays when the people in this house leave in the morning and come back in the evening, the temperature can drop below 72, can drop below 62, and the heating will not be turned on until a half an hour before the people return, and at which point the heat will be turned on. And this way, it's combining both an atmospheric scan, like what's going on in the house, and also a sense of schedule and other parameters. So we call that an automated. Autonomous refers not to just such simple actions, but a machine that is more goal-oriented. So excuse me, I'm going to sneeze for a second. Okay, I managed to mute, so I'm very pleased about that. And thank you, Shoshana. So an autonomous machine is goal-oriented. So I use Google Maps for my orientation, sometimes Waze to get to work. And so I set it to take me from Manhattan to West Orange, New Jersey, where my school is. And it is checking traffic data and making determinations based on several factors. What will be the fastest route? What will be the cheapest route? What will be the most fuel efficient route? Also, what patterns are there that might indicate that once I set out on the route, it might change in the next few minutes. So it's actually a rather sophisticated system, and in that way, it's autonomous. And so when you pair artificial intelligence with that type of ability, it begins to act in the world. Of course, it's not driving my car anyway. I don't have an autonomous vehicle, but it does assist in the process, and at some point will, of course, be able to drive without my assistance. And in that case, it will be fully autonomous. Now, even though we're speaking about autonomous vehicles here, the truth is that machines that are autonomous function in many other circumstances. There is autopilot in airplanes, and the autopilot in an airplane has a lot of ability to change the route, to adjust the banking of the plane, its altitude and velocity, and all those things. And sometimes those machines obviously fail in the case of those the Boeing 737 MAX flights. But in general, an autopilot system is more like an automated than a truly autonomous system. And it does not take into consideration any moral considerations. It's been designed to prevent the plane from banking too steeply or diving or climbing too fast, because these things might cause people to pass out. But it doesn't know anything about that. It just has been constrained by its algorithms from making those moves. But what about a machine that actually was capable of moral reasoning, where you could say, not just get me home, but perhaps set a different goal, like fight against crime, let's say, or prevent theft. And that was actually going to then take actions in the world. And what if you were to say that this machine could control physical features of the world, perhaps opening and closing locks, or turning lights on and off, or calling for help? Or could it be even an autonomous weapon system? That's called AWS, Autonomous Weapon System. And right now in the world, over 90 countries have developed autonomous weapon systems or purchased them. Some of the leaders are, of course, the United States and China, but also Israel. And so just is to get your interest, but it's also to freak you out a little bit. But Israel currently has deployed quite a few autonomous weapon systems. I'll mention a few of them. One is called the Trophy system. It's mounted on armored vehicles like their Merkava tank, and it's designed to respond to an incoming munition like a rocket-propelled grenade. And so you could imagine if you're in a tank and someone behind you shoots an RPG at you, you won't be able to respond fast enough. And what are you going to do? Actually, you try to turn, you're not going to get away from that munition. So the trophy system is designed to respond immediately by shooting back at the munition as it's inbound and exploding by it in order to detonate the munition before it hits the tank and therefore save the tank and its crew. So I think most people would say, "Oh, that's great. That's a wonderful thing." It's like I don't know, automatic brakes, that are designed to activate if I'm about to collide with another car. It's just a machine protecting me from another machine, from an RPG. But then there are other systems which are a little bit more on the offense. Israel has a system called Harpy, which is a type of drone that loiters in the sky above an enemy combatant, let's say over Gaza and Hamas, and searches for certain targets like radar displays. And it's called set and forget. It goes off and does its thing, and it does not need to check back with a human commander before engaging that target and shooting at, let's say, the radar display and or radar array. And so you might say about that one, well, okay, I think I'm okay with that too. After all, it's a machine attacking a machine, and sure, there might be people near the radar, but it is a combat situation, and so perhaps this is for the best. There are other systems that are drones that are designed to go into buildings and to map out the buildings and go around corners and search for humans and signs of humans and create a visual map, which is then used by soldiers before they go into that building. And again, you might say, well, there's nothing lethal there. It's just data gathering, and I'm okay with that. But then there are other systems. There's one called Guardium, IUM at the end, which is a armed little vehicle, a small vehicle that Israel uses that can patrol areas like out the perimeter outside of Gaza, which can engage targets, including humans, and fire at them and kill them. And I've not heard any reports of actual lethal firing by the Guardian system, but it's possible. It's hard to know exactly what's going on at the ground. And then, if that were not enough, there's a few more systems. There's one which was reported this summer before the war began, which is codenamed HaBesorah, the gospel, which is the Hebrew word for the gospel, like the Christian Bible. And it's an automated targeting system. It was designed to help Israel in a time of total war, where it's being attacked by many countries, many directions at once, and that would overwhelm human analysts. And so this system is meant to be able to look at all the data coming in, too much for a human to be able to absorb, and then to identify targets. It can then be partnered with another AI system, which is called Fire Factory, which can then do an inventory of assets, such as drones or fighter jets that are in the sky and what munitions they have on them, and then to pair them so that the system could identify targets to strike. Now, I'm raising all these things because there's a way for these systems to be set as fully autonomous, where the AI analyzes the environment, determines whether targets meet the criteria, and then engages them. Um, and then there are others where there's no human in the loop. The human is called out of the loop, or perhaps next to the loop. It may be a system where, like the Iron Dome, for instance, which identifies incoming missiles, and then there are humans stationed there, and they might be able to interrupt the system from attacking, saying, no, no, that's not an incoming missile, that's an Israeli drone or something like that, an override. That would make it semi-autonomous. So in military circles, this whole loop that I'm referring to goes by an acronym called OODA, OODA. OODA stands for four words: observe, orient, decide, act. Observe, orient, act, decide, act, OODA. So if you could imagine for a moment that you're a sentry standing guard outside of a base, and you're looking at the road and the area in front of the base, and you're calm because you don't see anything. But now you see a car approaching. So all of a sudden you orient towards that car and you say, oh, does that vehicle have any markers that it belongs to the base? Do I recognize the driver? What's going on with this situation? And you're looking closely. And if the vehicle starts to act in a way that's concerning, it's perhaps accelerating towards your post, and it doesn't have any reassuring markings, then you have to make a decision. What do I do? Do I call for help? Do I hold up my hand and say stop? Do I shoot a warning shot? Do I shoot at the driver? And then the final step is acting. So a fully autonomous weapon system would do all four of those things. It would observe, orient, decide, and act, whereas a semi-autonomous system would pause before acting and ask for human authorization before using deadly force against a human. And so one of the things I want you to be thinking about is, what do you think Judaism might have to say about a machine that takes a deadly decision, a lethal decision without human input? What do we think about machines acting as our agents? And so with that, I'm going to turn to some texts, and hopefully, at least Shoshana, we got your attention there, and Kayla too, and here we go. Right.
But just to kind of
So,
jump on your initial question, maybe
yeah,
because it's where Dafyomi is, my first thought is
yeah,
something that does damage without a human, something that is not a human who causes damage. Well, then what of the four models can we fit it in? Like,
good. Right. So in Parshat Mishpatim last week, we learned about the goring ox, we learned about the pit, and we learned about the fire. Right. And so these are some of the archetypes of that are used at the beginning of Bava Kama when we're learning about Nizikin, about these kinds of damage. And indeed, that is one of the things we'll be looking at. So let's jump right in.
yeah.
Although I'm I only chose some of the text, so this is actually going in a slightly different direction to Bava Metzia. So in the paper that I wrote, the tshuva I wrote for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which is the first chapter of my book, I sort of use a few different halakhic lenses. One is shlichut, which is agency. Can you appoint someone to be your agent? Can you use an animal to be your agent? Can you use a courtyard feature of your house to be your agent? And the thing comes to a so if I want to claim something, I'm walking in Reshut HaRabim in the public square, and I come across an object which seems to be ownerless. It's hefker. It doesn't have any markings on it. It's just a $20 bill lying there, right? There's no one, it doesn't say it's Kayla's $20 bill. It doesn't say it's Shoshana's $20 bill. It's just a $20 bill that's lying there. And so I walk up to it and I pick it up. And when I do that, I claim it as my own. And someone else can try to take it from me, but they'll have to prove that it was really theirs first. Well, can 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 a that claim be made also by an animal, let's say? Or could it be made by a courtyard? So, for instance, if a man is serving a bill of divorce to a woman, normally he would have to hand it to her, but he could also throw it at her feet. And if it falls within 4 cubits of her, then it would be considered like he served her bill of divorce. What about if she's in a courtyard in her home and he sort of like knocks on the gate and throws it into the courtyard? Does that count? So these are examples of ways that agency could be extended to a non-human agent. Now, in general, and I'm sort of skipping ahead of a lot of material here, but in general, we say that a person's agent is like them. Shlucho shel adam kamoto is the expression. So if Kayla, you're going to Israel to visit your friends at Drisha over there, and I say, hey, Kayla, would you do me a favor, give tzedakah for me? And I give you that $20 bill. And you say, sure, I'll do that for you. So you're a shaliach mitzvah. You're taking this object for me. And when you give that tzedakah in Israel, it's as if my hand is actually giving the tzedakah because you are my agent. Shlucho shel adam kamoto. You also get reward for this. You get the schar halakhic. You are, after all, a person who carried it and allowed the mitzvah to be accomplished. But Kayla, imagine that I didn't do such a nice thing. I did something a little less nice. Okay. So I said, hey, Kayla, um, Shoshana lives down the block and there's a nice bicycle in her garage. And would you mind go getting that bike for me? And I'm sure she won't miss it. And so you go to Shoshana's house, you go into her garage, and you take her bike out and you're bringing it to me when the police show up because Shoshana saw it happening, called the police on you. And Kayla, the police say to you, stop thief. And you say, no, no, I'm not a thief. You don't understand. I'm just the messenger. Danny's the thief. He's the one who told me to steal it, right? And how would that go over with the police? Um,
I think they call that abiding, or well, the police have their own separate, I guess, definition for the person. In which case, I think I would be as the person found with Shoshana's bike in her hands. I'd be the, I guess, the of the theft, and then maybe you would be a thank you, Shoshana. She said conspiracy to commit the offense. I'm not actually a lawyer, but either way, one of us is the primary driver. One of us is going to get a side charge, and it's not going to go well.
Right. Oh, she watched a lot of Law and Order. Good. So, yeah, I mean, it's not going to go well for you, Kayla, because just doing a favor for a friend is not actually an excuse. But why not? If we say Shlucho shel Adam Kamoto, my agent is exactly like me, then why doesn't it work? So the rabbis put a limit on agency, and it says Ein Shaliach L'Davar Avera. There is no agency for sin, for a transgression. So you, Kayla, were supposed to know, remember your 10 commandments when it said Lo Tignov, and you were supposed to remember God told me not to steal things. And just because Rabbi Nevins said, go steal, who's your allegiance to? Is it to me or is it to God? Right. And hopefully the correct answer is to God, right? Yes. Okay. So as the rabbis say, the rabbi speaks and the student speaks. To whom are you going to listen? And so in this case, God is the Rav. And but then that raises a problem. If I say, Kayla, that you shouldn't have stolen, all right, and so now you are liable for paying not that only for the bike, Shoshana's bike, but there's this idea in Judaism we learned last week in the Parsha again of kefil. If you steal Shoshana's bike, let's say her bike was worth $100, you have to actually give her $200. You have to kind of make yourself the victim of the same crime that you tried to make her the victim of, right? So you pay what you would have taken from her. So it's a knas, a penalty. So you might say, oh, okay, so Danny tricked me into stealing Shoshana's bike. I did it, and now I'm paying a double penalty. Well, what happens if, Kayla, you are not just a free person, but you are actually a slave or a child?
Hmm. Things get interesting then, because then since I'm not quite a full halakhic human, then I have a diminished responsibility. That may not preclude all responsibility,
Right,
but it might mean that since I'm not a full person and maybe I don't have funds, I can't pay a knas. Who's
right,
the responsible person for me? Do they pay the knas?
right. So you're a full person, but you don't have full ownership of property. And so therefore, how do you pay a knas? You don't actually have your own assets. And I hate to say it, but halakhically in traditional literature, same is also true for a married woman, because when she gets married, whatever property she brings into the marriage, her husband becomes the manager of that property. She doesn't have access to it. So a married woman who steals on behalf of her husband could have a self-defense. Well, I can't pay that fine. You'll have to go after him, right? So this is raising all these complicated issues, which we'll get to back to autonomous. So I'm going to read now in the Hebrew or in the Aramaic, as it were. Amar Ravina, Hechamrinan de'in shaliach l'devar avera. When we said that there's no agent for transgression, Hecha de shaliach bar chiyuvahu. That was only when the agent was themselves a liable and obligated person. Okay, so a child who's not bar mitzvah is not obligated, so they can't be told, oh, 3-year-old kid, you should have known better. They didn't know better, and they weren't responsible, right? And that's also true for the Eved. Aval b'chatzer de lav bar chiyuvahu. But when we talk about a courtyard, which is taking possession of an object which was not actually hefker, but was belonged to someone, the the courtyard is not itself bar mitzvah. It's not commanded. It's not responsible. It's just a thing, a place, and therefore the person who orchestrated the action is Michayev Sholcho, is going to be responsible. Elamiata haomer liisha ve'eved tzu'u ginvuli delav b'nei chiyuva ninhu. So therefore, a man who says to his wife or to his servant, and again, this is offensive, I get it, but this is part of the ancient world we're dealing with here. He says to them, go steal something from me. Since they are not liable for the knas, for the penalty, hachinami d'mechayvi shochan. Does that also mean that the one who sent them to do this crime is liable? Amart, Isha ve'eved b'nei chiyuva ninhu. You could say, well, actually, it's different because the man and the woman, sorry, the woman and the servant are indeed responsible not to steal. V'hashta miha leit laho l'shlami, but they just don't have the ability to pay because, like I said before, they don't control their own assets. Titran, and we actually have a mission that teaches this. Nit garsha isha nishtachrer ha'eved chayavin l'shalem. Because in fact, if their status were to change, if the woman were to be divorced or the servant were to be manumitted to be freed from servitude, then they would become responsible to pay because now they would control their own assets. So the reason I thought that this was interesting for our case is that a machine does not seem to be bar chiyuva. It doesn't seem to be liable for its own actions. And so therefore, perhaps you would say that a non-human agent can never truly be morally or religiously responsible. There's a second explanation from a different Amora. Rav Sama Amar, when we said this thing about them not being responsible for the sins, that was only in a case where the agent had free will to either say, yes, I agree with this mission. Your mission, should you accept it? They say, no, I don't accept it. Kayla says, sorry, Rabbi Nevins, if you want Shoshana's bike, you're going to have to go get it yourself, right? So if Kayla's a free person, she can say that. And so if she says, fine, I'll do you a favor, then she's responsible. But if Kayla doesn't have that ability, if she's my servant or something, then she's not responsible. Aval chatzer, the bal korche motiv ba, but the courtyard, which has no will, this object is placed in it and it sits there without its consent, mechayev sholcho. Therefore, the one who sent it is liable. And so we're talking here about, again, an object that enters into a courtyard. The gate is closed, and the courtyard is you can't use the courtyard as an excuse for I didn't really steal your goat, my courtyard did. You can't say that because the courtyard, either in Ravina's analysis or Rav Sama's analysis, is not a moral actor. So the question is going to be, well, what about an autonomous machine, which is actually a lot more skilled than a courtyard? At some point, do you get to enough presence of mind, as it were, that it does become liable? Anybody have a question before I proceed to the next slide? Okay. Here we're going to look at the laws of Shabbat. There was a question asked of Rabbi the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Karelitz, Avram Yishai Karelitz, who was a great rabbi in the land of Israel during the mandatory period in what became Tel Aviv. And he was saying that, well, if you're a farmer and you're driving a tractor and it's Shabbat, you can't say, well, the tractor was pushing itself, I was just steering it, right? Because you were actually controlling the tractor, right? And a basis for that is kind of here in a medieval source. Nachmanides from Ban in his commentary on the Talmud, Chidushim to Bavli Shabbat. And he differentiates between two different uses of an animal. ונאמר בזה, שמפני שהחורש בבהמה הוא נותן לה העול, והוא כובש אותה תחת ידו, וברשותו היא עומדת, כל מלאכה שם האדם היא, ובו היא תלויה. ואין הבהמה אלא ככלי ביד אומן. So if a person is plowing with an animal that's in a yoke, and it's Shabbat, let's say, and so someone says, hey, you're guilty of choresh, you are doing a forbidden labor on Shabbat, Sabbath plowing, right? They can't say, oh, I'm not doing it, I'm just standing here, the donkey's doing all the work, it's pulling it, right? Because you're completely controlling the donkey, it's in a yoke, and therefore it's just like a tool in your hand. You can't say, if you're hammering on Shabbat, you're holding a hammer and you're driving a nail into wood. You can't say, well, I'm not actually hammering. The hammer is doing the hammering. I'm just holding the hammer. I'm pointing it in the right direction, but the actual work is being done by the metal head. No, you're in complete control of this process, and so therefore you are liable for the work that you are doing through this machine, simple machine. So too with an animal. But then he gives another example that has to do with carrying on Shabbat. And imagine you have a pack animal, let's say it's a donkey again, and you're at home and you put a load on the back of the donkey, and then you go, Yalla, go to Kayla's house. And the donkey sets off, and we've done this enough times during the week that it knows where it's going, and so it goes to Kayla's house carrying this load. A bunch of sidurim because Kayla's having a big davening at her house, okay? So could happen, right? But you forgot to get sidurim before Shabbat, and now there's no eruv, so what are you going to do? So I'm like, oh, we'll use the donkey. And the donkey is going to stop along the way. It's going to get a sip of water from the stream. It's going to chew on some grass. It might go, it might not go. Eventually it'll get there. So I could say, well, I'm not really responsible. Yeah, sure, I wanted it to go to Caleb, but I didn't actually control it. So in the Hebrew, at the last three lines, ve'ena domeh lemechamer shehabehima hi holechet lenafsha, ela sheyesh la hitarut mat min mechamer. Mechamer is like from the word chamor, like a donkey driver, right? So it's not similar to a donkey driver because the animal goes in its own way, at its own pace, and it kind of knows a little bit of what you want, but it does its own thing. So here you've got a differentiation between a machine, I'm sorry, between an animal that's doing exactly what it's told and another one which sort of has more independence. And so again, this might be relevant to an autonomous machine. If I call an Uber just before Shabbat and I say, take me across town, and I get in the back of the car and it's already charged to my credit card, and then the machine drives in its own route and it stops at red lights and for pedestrians and it makes turns and it goes a way that I wouldn't have expected. It's not really like the person driving the plowing. It's a bit more like that donkey. And so, arguably, using machines in this way would allow you to evade some responsibility, whether it's for damages that are caused. If the machine were to hit somebody, let's say, you would say, "Oh, I didn't do that. That was my car that did it." And I wasn't even driving it. I was doing my email in the back. Um, and also perhaps to allow us to drive on Shabbat because we wouldn't be the ones who were making that decision. Anyway, that's the question. Um, now,
The example of an Uber is also an interesting example because even if, say, I'm in an Uber or a car service or or a regular taxi where the driver is driving and God forbid the car hits something and causes damages, there are people who will be liable. The taxi hire company or the auto or the car hire company will be liable. The driver will likely be liable, but for the passenger to be liable for any of the damages would have to probably be some extenuating circumstances.
well, isn't that the problem, Kayla? Because who really is responsible in this case? Is it so I ordered the ride and I was sitting in there and I was benefiting from it, and so it went over and it ran over someone's dog. So maybe it's me, or maybe it's the person who owns the car, which is some company, or maybe it's the salespeople who sold the car, or maybe it's the manufacturer, or maybe it's the engineer who created the algorithm.
But it sounds like there's enough degrees of removal that, you know, in halacha land where we're deciding, car damages in front of a Beit Din, you'd be this would in this the passenger would be further down on the list of the people to be charged.
Right, right, because we do have this idea of like Shani and Shlishi, and there's also a sense of there's kocho and koach kocho, like something that, so for instance, if I shoot an arrow and it hits a rock, which ricochets and then hits another rock and puts someone's eye out, you could say, well, yeah, I was responsible because I set the whole chain of events into motion. Or you could say, no, no, it was too unpredictable, and at some point the responsibility breaks down. Another issue is freak accidents. So I set a fire. I was burning leaves in my backyard, and it was a safe fire, I thought. But then this huge gust of wind comes and blows the fire to your yard, and now all of a sudden your gadish, your pile of grain is up in flames. And I say, whoever saw such a wind, right? And it's a ruach lo mitsuya, it's not a common type of wind. And so you could say the Tesla manufacturer, let's say, well, that's true. The Tesla in automatic mode did run into that white truck. That's true. But it was an unusual scenario because it was a truck that blended in with the background and it this and that, and these things changed. And so we're not really responsible because it was a freak accident. At what point do we say, well, that's not a good enough excuse? Um, and I think that when it comes to lethality, so maybe for Shabbos, we're talking about Hilchot Shabbat, maybe we're going to say that enough steps of removal from the direct action makes it into something what the rabbis call grama, which is sort of like an indirect action, in which case you could say, all right, maybe I'm not responsible. But when it comes to something that has life and death significance, dinei nefashot, then perhaps we want to say that yes, the responsibility should be broader, and even a person who used this tool, even though they didn't intend to cause the harm, they would be considered like the wood chopper, where the axe handle head flies off and kills someone. It's not murder, but it is manslaughter, and there are consequences in their case of having to go to the Ir Miklat. I'm going to do one more or two more texts here. So at the beginning, I asked about whether we have any models for sort of agents that are not human representing us. And there are other examples we didn't go into, like creating an Eruv Chatzerot on Shabbat, or an Eruv Tchumim on Shabbat, using an animal like a elephant to carry the Eruv, the Bishul. But there are some strange texts in Judaism that have to do with sort of human-like agents. And the most famous is the golem. Now, the golem doesn't appear in the Talmud, but this story does appear in the Talmud. And as you'll see, it's kind of the source of a lot of medieval golemology. So this is in Bavli Sanhedrin 65b. And it's a story about two rabbis, Rava and his chavruta, Rabbi Zera. Amar Rava, ibau tzadiki baru alma. If the righteous really wanted, they could make an entire world. Shneamar, because there's a verse, ki avonotechem hayu mavdilim v'gomer. Right, so your sins are all that separates you from God. So if you don't sin, if you're a tzaddik, then you're kind of divine. Right? And if you're divine, then you can actually create just like God can create. And there are references to this. I guess I should give a little more background. There's this idea of that the righteous can use a book, the earliest book of Jewish mysticism, which is called Sefer Yetzirah. Arguably the Torah is the earliest book of Jewish mysticism, because what's more mystical than God spoke to Moses? That's a mystical thing, right? But Matan Torah is a mystical thing. But there is this book called Sefer Yetzirah, which seems to go back to early rabbinic times. And part of it, what it does is it plays on a strange verse in chapter 2 of Genesis, where it says, Ele toldot hashamayim ba'aretz behi baram. This is the story, the history of the heaven and earth in their creation. Behi baram, this sort of passive form. And in a midrash called Bereshit Rabbah, Behi baram is rearranged as Ba'avraham. This is the creation of the heaven and the earth through Abraham. And in this mystical book, Sefer Yetzirah, it says that Avraham knew the secrets of creation from God, of what letter combinations, tserufei otiot, and what sfirot, with numbers, were used to create. And so when you remember that story of Avraham and the three angels in Parshat Vayera, when that incident happened, it says that Vayaretz Avraham al ben bakar shirasa. Abraham ran to the cattle, or to the young calf that he had made. And in Sefer Yetzirah, they believe that this means that Abraham actually made the calf using Sefer Yetzirah. I'm sorry, it's a later quote that thinks that he used Sefer Yetzirah. And that's why he was able to serve dairy and meat together, because it was a magical animal, right? And according to this and another Talmudic story, animals made with Sefer Yetzirah don't have the status of animals, and therefore they're not fleshing, right? And so this is important for my lab-grown meat tshuva, which is a different project. So anyway, here it says that the righteous could create a world. So then it goes on, it says this crazy thing, Rava, Bara, Gavra. So Rava created, the word bara, like Bereshit bara Elohim. Gavra is like Gever, he made a man. Shadre, the Kame de Rav Zera, and he sent it before Rabbi Zera. So you can imagine the scene, right? Rava takes this guy, he makes him somehow, and sends him knocking on his friend's door. Havakam ishtai bahade. And so Rabbi Zera was there and started talking to it, but it wasn't able to respond to him. So Rabbi Zera is talking to this person, but the person's not talking back. Amrle, so Rabbi Zera says to him, Min chevrayat, you come from the friends, the magicians, the fellowship, something like that. Um, there's a lot of theory about the etymology of chavraya here, but there's a pasuk that says chover chaver, a person who casts a spell. So it could be that this is like the spellcasters. You're a magical creature. Hadar la'afrech, go back to your dirt. In other words, dissolve. And so Rabbi Zera, as it were, dissolves this mud man, kills it, I guess. Um, and then there's another story about Rav Chanina, Rav Oshaya, Havigat, Ve'Komali Shabta, Ve'askib Sefer Yetzirah. These rabbis every Friday would study Sefer Yetzirah, Mivru Lahu, Igla Tilta, and they would make a little calf, a third-grown calf, the Achlele, and they would eat it. So you've got this sense that the great sainted rabbis of the Talmud were capable of doing these incredible feats. So that story from Rava Bar Gavra was the source of a lot of medieval legends. And the most famous one is of a rabbi called Elijah of Chalm. Chalm is a real city. It's not just a joke town. It's a real city in Poland. And there was this rabbi whose son was Tzvi Ashkenazi, the Chacham Tzvi, and or his grandson, I'm sorry. And then Tzvi Ashkenazi's son in turn was Rabbi Yaakov Emden, one of the great rabbis of Germany. Anyway, there's this whole story here about he's relating to this thing about the Sefer Yetzirah. I've wondered, I didn't bring the whole Hebrew text, forgive me, it's just long, but I've wondered regarding a person created by means of the Sefer Yetzirah, such as that one mentioned in Sanhedrin, Rava created a man, and also such as the one attested to my great-grandfather, our teacher, Rabbi Elijah, Chief Justice of the Holy Community of Cham, whether such a man could be included in the minyan of 10 for matters which require 10, such as Kaddish and Kedusha. Do we say that since it is written, I should be sanctified amongst the children of Israel, v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Israel, that he may not be counted since he is not part of b'nei Israel? After all, this is a mud guy that was just created yesterday. He's not b'nei Israel, so he doesn't count to the minyan. Or perhaps considering the statement in Sanhedrin that kol megadel yatom bebeito ki'ilu Gilado is what it says in the Talmud, although there's a textual variant that says asa'o, right? Whoever raises an orphan in their home, it's as if they gave birth to them, or maybe even that they created them. The scripture would raise up the golem to the status of the one born to them. So when you adopt a child, you become their parent. And according to this, you really become their parent. So in a way, maybe the golem is really this rabbi's child and therefore has the same status of being a human. For scripture mentions the 5 children of Michal. This is Michal bat Shaul, daughter of King Saul. But did Michal give birth to them? Didn't Merav give birth? And then it says, didn't she give birth to them? Rather, Merav gave birth and Michal raised them, etc. So this is an adoptive relationship. Here too, since the man is the handiwork of the righteous, he might be considered part of Israel. For we learn, and this is another quote, Masei Yedeim Shel Tzadikim Toldotam, that the deeds of the righteous are their actual children. If so, the golem might be counted. And now he says, but he's going to say, well, but maybe not. It seems to me that since Rabbi Zera said, you are from the fellowship of magicians, return to the earth, Shuv La'afarech, that he killed him. And if it had occurred to him that the golem could be included among the 10 matters of Kedusha, Rabbi Zera would not have removed him from the world. Even though killing the golem is not considered murder. And now it's another beautiful drasha from Parshat Noach. You probably know this pasuk, Kol Shofech Dam Adam, Ba'adam Damo Yishafech. It's a chiastic structure, in this case, ABC, CBA. You know what that means? ABC, CBA. Right, so Shofech, spill, Dam, blood, Adam, of a person, Ba'adam, by a person, damo, his blood, yishafech, will be spilled. So basically it's saying, if you murder, then you'll be killed. But he's reading it hyper literally. Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam. If you kill a person who is born of a person, excuse me, if you kill a person who is Adam ba'Adam, a person who comes from a person, meaning a person who is born to a woman, only then are you liable for murder. But if you kill a person who is not made by through another person, but was done through magic, then it's not murder. Only killing such a person would be considered murder, thus excluding the man made by Rava, who was not formed in his mother's womb. Nevertheless, since the golem had some utility, Rabbi Zera should not have removed him from the world, but certainly he would not count among the 10. Thus, it seems to me, Tzvi Ashkenazi, and then a little puzzle here, he signs off as Samech Tet, which usually when you see that, it stands for Sephardi Tahor, but what's his name? Tzvi Ashkenazi. So that's weird, isn't it? And he's got the title Chacham Tzvi. So in theory, he was a Ashkenazi guy who went off to study in Turkey and got the title Chacham, so he was living as a Sephardi. But would he really be Sephardi Tahor then? It's a little bit like the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was born in an Ashkenazi family, but was educated in Egypt in a Sephardi environment. So he was called the Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak, Ari, unless it means Elohi, the divine. Anyway, maybe it just means Seife L'Tava. May he come to a good end. By the way, there's a little bit more about the golem. In Rabbi Yaakov Emden, he preserves another family tradition that Rabbi Elijah of Chelm killed the golem himself because it was getting too big, and he was scared of it. So it had a kamea on its neck, and he took off the divine name, and it went back to dirt. Now, you might be looking at me with some puzzlement and saying, I know this story, but it's not about Elijah of Chelm. It's about the Maharal in Prague. So it's interesting because there are no contemporaneous texts of the Maharal of Prague that have anything to do with the golem. It was really only in the 19th century, the late 19th century, that there's a Scully article called How the Golem Came to Prague, where the story was kind of transferred from the Chacham Tzvi, from the Elijah of Chelm, to his contemporary in Prague, the better known Maharal. And also in this book that added and claimed that it was really about the Maharal, it was a book called Niflaot Maharal. It's a late 19th century book. It also pairs it with a blood libel in which the Jews are being attacked because of a blood libel, and the golem comes to their defense. All right, so those are the texts I brought for you. So I'm just going to say a couple of takeaways, and if you have any questions, then we'll conclude. Some of the things that we considered tonight are we responsible for actions taken on our behalf by a machine? And if you can use the model of the courtyard or the model of animals, which I also talk about in the tshuva, then you might be able to say that, no, you're not responsible for the actions of a machine. Except you might then differentiate, as we saw with Ramban, between actions where you are directly controlling the machine, like hammering, or driving a car or a tractor, and ones which you are benefiting from an independent action by the machine. And we might say that those actions would still be usher, but they would be in the Derabanan level, the lower level, where you would say patura valasur. You're not liable because you didn't do the action yourself, but you still shouldn't do it. And so we might make that lower level determination. By the way, there was a great rabbi in the 20th century in Israel. He started his life in America, named Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Har Etzion, the Gush. And toward the end of his life, he wrote a long essay by Ramban on the Dine de Game, laws of indirect work. And in it, Rav Lichtenstein said that a smart thief might be able to use technology to evade responsibility. So I don't steal Kayla from you, but I might set up an algorithm to try to figure out ways to break into people's bank accounts and then transfer money. And I'm not telling it to break into your account or anyone in particular's account. I'm just having it look for vulnerabilities. And so if I get hauled into court, like you stole all this money from all these people, I'd say, no, no, I just created an algorithm and then I was the beneficiary of what it did, right? So you could, in theory, get off of full liability because you didn't directly do the stealing. And Rav Lichtenstein was saying that we halakhists must come up with solutions so that people's range of responsibility gets extended. And here I want to mention a philosopher named Hans Jonas, who was a German Jewish philosopher who wrote a book called The Imperative of Responsibility, in which he said that in a time of great technology, we should expand our realm of responsibility and make sure that we become responsible for not only our own actions, but actions done by machines on our behalf, and not only in the proximate range, like immediate, but also distant range. He was talking more about environmental damage that might not be fully realized for a few generations, but those who created the conditions should also be responsible. Um, I do think when it comes to weapon systems that humans should always be in the loop and that we should all be working hard to prevent the development of fully autonomous lethal weapon systems that can kill without our consent. So I'm going to end with that. Shoshana, Kayla, do either of you have questions or comments?
No question, just a comment that unfortunately, with a quote that I can unfortunately not source at this moment, that no computer should make no one should let a computer make a decision entirely on its own, which is absolutely not what the quote says, but that compute a lot of these things, while they have their own capability to kind of go off and do whatever, are made by humans, maintained by humans, monitored by humans, have all sorts of connections with other software or backups or whatever that are controlled by humans. So there's something they said. So it's interesting. This is an interesting to see like how truly autonomous is what we would think an autonomous thing is, and even if it's not that autonomous, should we be responsible for it? I don't know. That's what I was thinking. But
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the things that's a little bit alarming is that artificial intelligence has moved away from the original design where humans would write the code and and create algorithms which would be used by the machines. These days, the trend is towards what's called machine learning, where the machines are basically given a large environment and just analyze the environment and look for their own patterns. And as long as they've got a goal, like a prompt to a large language model like ChatGPT, write me a poem in the style of Shakespeare or whatever, they then figure it out on their own. You don't have all these algorithms that tell them how to do it. It's more they're looking at Shakespearean language and trying to find that. Shoshana has a comment here.
generally, these machines can only do as much as they're taught, even if they're acting quote autonomously. It's because they've been trained to do those things in certain instances or with certain prompts.
Correct. But we don't know where things go from here, right? And so as these machines master more and more information, um, will they at some point, start to identify goals that would be worthy and act unprompted? That's a question that remains to be seen. But for now, I would say that I guess to you, Kayla, I would say, well, certainly if it's going to affect another human, like medication or a parole decision or an application for insurance or a military situation, any of those things, I think a human's got to be involved and not let the machines decide and have such a big impact on us. So I'm going to end there, and thank you, Shoshana, and anybody who's on Facebook Live or who's downloads this later. I hope it's useful to you, and if you like, you can get my book in March, Torah and Technology, and read more about this for yourself.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you for the final class next week. I hope you'd enjoyed hearing Rabbi Nevins speak. We have more Spring Zman classes that are still ongoing, and if you want to check them out, you can sign up at 5784.spring.drisha.org. Take care and have a good night, everyone.
Good night.